Well, May 24th is observed as World Schizophrenia Day, a day that aims at increasing awareness about the disorder and inform and educate people about the challenges faced by patients. Let's discuss this further. We're now joined via Zoom by Ziphozihle Ntlanganiso, a member of the United Nations Generation Equity Working Group, who will also be talking to us about her own mother's journey with schizophrenia. A very good afternoon to you, Ziphozihle. Thank you so very much for giving us your time here on SABC News.
Good afternoon, Flo. Thank you so much for having me, and a very good afternoon to your viewers.
You're most welcome. You know, in our intro, I realized that we call schizophrenia a disorder, and I wondered to myself if this is even correct for us to label it like that. I mean, should it be called an illness as we do with many other mental health illnesses? I mean, does the word sort of trigger you or trigger people who do have schizophrenia?
It definitely, you've hit the nail on the head. It definitely is an illness, and the sooner we view it as such, the better for everyone. The more we will get to respect people living with this illness, like any other person who's living with diabetes or any other illness.
Yeah. I understand, of course, that your mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Talk to us about some of the challenges that, you experienced growing up. I mean, for you, it was, a lived experience. It wasn't just something that you read about. I know, incidentally, now you do, in fact, spend a lot of time studying and reading about schizophrenia. But just your experiences, when you were growing up, and I'm sure at the time you didn't know what was going on.
So my mother was diagnosed in 1993.
Yeah.
So this situation we've been dealing with now for the past 28 years. And the biggest challenge for as a child, I mean, I was probably 4 years old at the time. You can't make sense of what's going on. One minute you have this woman that is the most important person in your life, and the next you have someone who is hallucinating, who is delusional, who has turned violent.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge for her in particular is that, our societies, we come from a village outside King Williamstown. Society does not understand how to deal with a person suffering from schizophrenia. So that was the biggest challenge, the stigma. I mean, growing up, we would be referred to as abantwana begeza. Those who know, they know.
Yeah.
It's quite derogatory, and it's been the biggest challenge. Just getting access to adequate, adequate care, clinical care. It also becomes, quite a huge challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, was your mom able to seek, the help that she needed at the time? I mean, even at this time, we're sitting in 2021, where even getting help for mental illnesses is still a challenge at this time. I mean, you look at the cost of even visiting a psychologist, for example. I mean, people who don't even have medical aid. I mean, the situation must be even worse for people who don't have. But talk to us about, what you dealt with in terms of, was your mother able to, and what were her experiences with getting or seeking any sort of help?
So the most important, because we were kids and we were quite young, we relied largely on, her colleagues. We relied largely on family members. So the most important thing with schizophrenia is making sure that we give people the utmost support that we can give them. So with my mother, I would really like to commend her colleagues, because every time, on every relapse, it would sometimes happen when she's at work, and they would act on it immediately because we couldn't. We were children. Yeah. So she did manage to receive quite adequate health care, which would often, at times, she'd have to be away at home for a period of 3 months because she needs to be in a mental institution. But when you get to listen to how they are treated in those mental institutions, you wouldn't be happy. You remember the situation with life acid-dimene.
Yes.
You think back recently to what happened in Soweto. A woman set alight because of this illness. So it's medical health is there, but it's still unfortunately quite terrible.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about those experiences, and you know I'd like to talk about how it affected you in your later years. Some of the, and I don't know if you would call it a childhood trauma, but I certainly think there are parts of it. As a child having to deal with all of this, having your mother away for 3 months because she has to go to a mental institution. How has that affected you in your later years? Now, as an adult, I mean, how has it shaped you or changed the way that you think, maybe things would have been a different way had your mother had not had schizophrenia? I mean, I just want to, does it shape the adult you've now become today?
Mm-hmm. It definitely is traumatic. There's just no other way of describing it. I mean, when I was speaking in another interview, I was saying that every single time, for every single psychotic episode, it's like you yourself, you are going through a relapse. And if we are not careful as people or, children who are raised by parents who are suffering from this condition, the most important thing that I did for myself was to get myself mental care, get yourself therapy. So it affected me a great deal. But the most important thing, Flo, because you find other people, they tend to drug. They give up on their family members because you struggle to find motivation. So if one could just focus on everything that motivates you, that leaves you feeling motivated. For instance, as a child, I played a lot of sports. I was very much involved at school so that I can just block out everything and just focus on what I needed to focus on. It definitely is quite traumatic. Every relapse, you are relapsing yourself. And that is why I want to urge anyone living with the illness, please take your treatment.
Yeah. And I mean, we want to talk about the issue of, awareness that's, around schizophrenia, especially today as we commemorate World Schizophrenia Day. I'm sure you would argue that there isn't, enough being done in terms of creating awareness around the illness. I mean, you raise an issue which, interestingly enough, I also wanted to talk about, what happened in Soweto, where the lady was accused of bewitching people. Meantime, it turned out that she had schizophrenia, and she was murdered. And there's also, I mean, growing up, I remember, there were always jokes about schizophrenia. If you wanted to insult someone, you say, oh, they've got schizophrenia, and it was like some sort of a joke. I mean, these are some of the things that you would hear about schizophrenia. So I wonder what you think should be done in terms of creating that awareness, not just on a day like this where you and I are discussing it in World Schizophrenia Day, but just in general, what should be done?
I think, first of all, because the media is our mouthpiece, we need to strike a balance. Because, what you tend to find out is that what mainstream media does is to have mostly clinicians as the mouthpiece. You seldom find people who have gone through, severe forms of mental illness like schizophrenia. If we were to strike a balance in terms of what we present on mainstream media, we would have won the first round. And, secondly, schizophrenia has a face. It has a face of poverty. It has a face of, nothing will ever be okay. If we were to find more and more people like myself coming out and saying, hey, it doesn't really have to end like that. I mean, single-handedly, my dad passed on in 1997. My mother, with her condition, taking treatment, she managed to raise, 3, wonderful young ladies, well-educated, and who have managed to achieve everything that we've achieved today. So the most important thing is to strike a balance in our media. And lastly, Flo, very important, our state hospitals are really under-resourced. If you were to go to a mental health institution or a mental health ward, you would be shocked. I mean, they're just under-resourced, and just the professionals themselves, either they are not really well-equipped or they're just not as motivated. Just recently, my mother had a relapse, and she had to be obviously attended in the ER before they move her into, the actual mental ward. She fell head first because they had sedated her. No one is looking after her. No one is, no one really, cares.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, because it's just someone with a mental health illness.
Yeah. And today, just in
So-
closing, you know, what is your message then on World Schizophrenia Day? And just, you know, on a side note and probably a personal note, I mean, clearly she was well functioning in terms of looking at you and the kind of adult you've become today. Clearly, people who do have schizophrenia are able to be fully functional people. So what really is your message today?
My message today, first of all, I'll speak to people who are going through exactly what I went through, children.
Yeah.
Going through, you know, being raised by parents who suffer from schizophrenia. You don't have to turn to drugs. You don't have, because you're just literally leading your life to a downward trajectory. It will never change. So find things that impact you in a positive manner that leave you motivated. Secondly, we need to make sure that we support, if you're a primary caregiver, we need to offer unconditional support and make sure we understand the treatment plan that our loved ones are put on. You understand, you know, the side effects and counter those. So that's very important. And just making sure, if you yourself are not taking care of your mental health, how else can you take care of the next person's mental health? So make sure that you go for therapy and you yourself, you're in a good mental headspace, and do not give up on them. Treatment can make a whole lot of difference, a huge difference.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing something that is so incredibly personal with us here on SABC News. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Flo. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
That's Ziphozihle Ntlanganiso sharing with us her experiences having a mother who suffered from schizophrenia. And also, she is a member of the United Nations Generation Equity Working Group.